On the 27th of March, 1980, two Texas billionaires woke up to discover they owed $1.7 billion they didn't have. The day before, Nelson Bunker Hunt had called his brother William Herbert with a single instruction: shut it down. They couldn't meet a $135 million margin call. Within hours, silver prices collapsed more than 50%, from $21.62 to $10.80 per ounce. The Hunt brothers had just lost $10 billion in paper gains. Wall Street called it Silver Thursday, but even more extraordinarily, just 3 months earlier, the Hunt brothers had controlled nearly half the world's privately held silver supply. Their position was worth $10 billion, enough to make them temporarily among the richest individuals on Earth based on a single commodity bet. They had partnered with Saudi royalty, outmaneuvered short sellers on 3 continents, and driven silver prices up 700% in 4 months. Then the government changed the rules. Overnight, margin requirements jumped from 10% to nearly 100%. The most successful commodity speculation in modern history became a death trap. In today's episode of Old Money Empires, we examine how the sons of one of America's wealthiest oil barons nearly broke the global financial system, and what happened when regulators decided they had gone too far. The Hunt brothers' audacity was inherited. Their father, Haroldson Lafayette Hunt Jr., was born in 1889 near Ramsey, Illinois, the youngest of 8 children. His father believed formal education was an obstacle to making money, so HL was homeschooled, and he proved the theory spectacularly correct. By his 20s, HL Hunt was a compulsive gambler who could memorize an entire deck of cards after a single viewing. He understood odds instinctively. He accepted losses as the cost of discovering extraordinary returns. He drifted across America as a farmhand and lumberjack before settling in Arkansas to manage a cotton plantation. When the cotton market collapsed and natural disasters inflicted further losses, he pivoted to oil. The El Dorado oil boom of the 1920s presented opportunity. With only a borrowed $50, Hunt employed a deceptively simple strategy. He bought and sold oil leases almost simultaneously, capturing the arbitrage spread without requiring substantial capital. In 1930, at age 41, H.L. Hunt made the bet that would create a dynasty. Using his last $109 in cash plus borrowed capital, he acquired rights to the East Texas oil field from a wildcatter named Columbus Marion Dad Joyner. The field proved to be one of the richest oil deposits in the world, what industry observers called the Great Black Giant. That single acquisition transformed Hunt from a speculator into one of America's wealthiest men. By the 1950s, Fortune magazine ranked him among the 8 richest Americans, with estimates of his personal wealth ranging from $300 to even $700 million. His income exceeded $1 million per week during the peak years. And his estate, Mount Vernon on Dallas's White Rock Lake, sprawled across 10 acres with a 10,702 square foot Georgian colonial mansion featuring specimen live oak and pecan trees, heated pool, and tennis court. But H.L. Hunt's personal life was as complicated as his business empire was simple. Over his lifetime, he married multiple times, sometimes simultaneously, and fathered at least 15 children across 3 distinct families. His first wife, Lyda Bunton, bore 6 children: Margaret, Hassie, Caroline Rose, Nelson Bunker, William Herbert, and Lamar. His second wife, Ruth Ray, he allegedly married under the false identity of Franklin Hunt while still married to Lyda, a deception discovered in 1955 when his daughter Margaret found documentation at Mount Vernon. A third woman, Frania Ty from Shreveport, Louisiana, later claimed she too had been married to H.L. under yet another false identity, bearing him 4 additional children. FBI memoranda from the 1950s and 1960s documented allegations that H.L. ran prostitution networks in Arkansas and an illegal bookmaking operation from his Dallas office. He was never charged. H.L. Hunt's political ideology was equally extreme. Beginning in 1951, he established the Fax Forum Foundation, which produced radio and television programs broadcasting conservative, anti-communist political commentary. In 1958, he reconstituted this effort as the Lifeline Foundation, distributing a 15-minute radio program on more than 400 stations nationwide. The program cost Hunt approximately $2 million annually. When John F. Kennedy became the Democratic presidential nominee in 1960, Hunt's Lifeline intensified its assault, mixing warnings about Catholicism with questions about Kennedy's patriotism. The psychology driving such empire building and the family structures required to contain it receives extended treatment in our free Substack newsletter, where Dynasty's too complex for documentary format reveal what inherited ambition actually costs. Now, when H.L. Hunt died on November 29, 1974, he left an estate of $2 billion to $3 billion divided amongst his numerous heirs. His sons, Nelson Bunker and William Herbert, inherited not merely wealth, but their father's willingness to pursue outsized bets. And they would soon place the largest commodity bet in history. Now, the 1970s terrified wealthy Americans. Inflation was accelerating from 9% to double digits under President Jimmy Carter's administration. The dollar was depreciating rapidly. The Vietnam War, the 1973 OPEC oil embargo, and currency instability created an environment where investors desperately sought protection. Gold ownership had been prohibited until 1974. That left silver, the ideal inflation hedge for those with the capital to pursue it. Nelson Bunker Hunt, the lead strategist, saw silver trading below $2 per ounce in the early 1970s and calculated it could increase tenfold as the dollar collapsed. And his thesis was shared by many investors of the era. But the Hunts didn't simply want to invest in silver, they wanted to control it. Nelson Bunker had already demonstrated his appetite for tangible assets beyond oil. He had become one of the world's most influential thoroughbred racehorse owners and breeders, with operations spanning multiple continents. His bluegrass farm in Lexington, Kentucky encompassed 8,000 acres divided entirely to thoroughbred breeding. And at its height, his racing empire contained more than 1,000 horses. In 1967, he purchased the Irish-bred Vaguely Noble, who won the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe and became one of his most influential stallions. Through that single horse, he bred champions like Dahlia, the first filly to earn $1 million, and Exceller, the only horse in history to defeat both Seattle Slew and Affirmed in the same race. Over 3 decades, Bunker Hunt bred 158 stakes winners and 25 champions. He won the Eclipse Award for Outstanding Breeder in 1976, 1985, and 1987, and he even established the Waikato stud in New Zealand, pioneering the concept of shuttling Northern Hemisphere stallions to different hemispheres for breeding purposes. At the peak of his racing influence, Bunker Hunt was perhaps the single most powerful force in thoroughbred racing globally, a domain where unlimited wealth translates perfectly into competitive advantage. So the man understood how to corner a market in bloodlines, and silver would be his next conquest. Beginning in the early 1970s, the brothers adopted an approach that would make them infamous. They purchased massive quantities of physical silver while simultaneously buying futures contracts. The critical difference, instead of settling futures contracts for cash, standard practice, they took physical delivery of the metal. Bullion vanished from normal circulation into Hunt-controlled vaults. With futures markets requiring only about 10% margin, a $100 million investment gave them control over approximately $1 billion in silver. By late 1979, the Hunts accumulated an extraordinary position, approximately 100 to 195 million ounces of physical silver. That represented roughly 1/3 of the world's privately held supply, excluding government stockpiles, but they wanted more. Recognizing they had reached the limits of their personal capital, the Hunts formed International Metals Investment Company, a Bermuda-based entity that partnered with wealthy Saudi and Kuwaiti investors. Their key partner was Mahmoud Fustak, a prominent Saudi businessman and brother-in-law to the Saudi crown prince. The partnership brought an additional 40 to 150 million ounces under their coordination. Although IMIC was technically a separate entity, it operated with remarkable coordination regarding silver accumulation decisions. Regulators would later characterize this as a conspiracy. The Hunt's lawyers argued it was simply parallel investment decisions by sophisticated investors sharing similar economic outlooks. The partnership expanded their coordinated silver position to potentially 200 plus million ounces, nearly half of the world's available supply. So the Hunts had carefully structured their activities to avoid triggering position limit violations. Exchanges tracked individual accounts but didn't automatically aggregate positions across coordinated entities unless those parties formally declared coordination. The Hunt brothers never made such declarations, so the trap was set. So the strategy worked spectacularly at first. Silver moved from $11 per ounce in September 1979 to a peak of $50.35 on January 18, 1980. A 700% increase in less than 4 months. Gold peaked at $850 per ounce on the same day. At the apex, the Hunt brothers' silver holdings were worth approximately $10 billion on paper, making them temporarily among the world's richest individuals based on a single commodity position. In the final 9 months of 1979 alone, the family earned an estimated $2 to $4 billion in speculative profits. The mechanics were elegant and brutal. As the Hunts accumulated physical silver and took delivery on futures contracts, traders who had bet on falling prices, short sellers, faced catastrophic losses. These shorts were forced to cover their positions by buying silver in an increasingly constrained market. Their buying pressure drove prices higher, forcing more shorts to cover, a self-reinforcing spiral that the Hunts had generated. The brokerages financing the operation were now dangerously exposed. Bache Halsey Stort Shields had lent the Hunt family $233 million secured by silver. Merrill Lynch held approximately $150 million in Hunt loans and unsecured debit balances. The Hunt's $10 billion position was built on perhaps $1 to $2 billion in actual capital combined with approximately $1.5 billion in broker loans and $78 billion in unrealized paper gains. But the fundamental issue was leverage. Industries dependent on silver screamed. Jewelers faced exponentially higher costs. Photographers using silver film saw their expenses explode, and electronics manufacturers and dental professionals scrambled for alternatives. On March 26, 1980, Tiffany & Co. took out a full-page advertisement in the New York Times. "We think it is unconscionable for anyone to hoard several billion, yes billion, dollars worth of silver and thus drive the price up so high that others must pay artificially high prices for articles made of silver." Americans began melting down silver, jewelry, and coins to profit from the high prices. New mining production ramped up. Supply was being destroyed even as the Hunts tried to corner it. And demand was evaporating as industrial users sought alternatives. Photography would shift toward digital imaging. Jewelry manufacturers substituted materials. The position was worth $10 billion, but the Hunts couldn't sustain buying against the entire world's annual silver production indefinitely. Eventually, supply would overcome demand, prices would stabilize, and leverage would become unbearable. So the position was mathematically unsustainable, and the government recognized it first. By January 1980, government agencies recognized an existential threat to financial stability. The brokerages that had financed the Hunt positions, Bache Halsey Stort Shields and Merrill Lynch, were exposed to billions in potential losses. If the Hunts defaulted, the brokerages could collapse. If the brokerages collapsed, the banks that financed them could follow. The entire financial system was at risk, according to the government. So the regulators moved with stunning speed. On January 6, 1980, just 11 days before silver's peak, the commodity exchange adopted Silver Rule 7. The new rules increased margin requirements from approximately 10% to nearly 100% in cash. They banned new purchases of silver futures on margin, liquidation only for existing positions. They imposed strict position limits on maximum holdings. Overnight, leveraged speculation in silver became impossible. The rules effectively eliminated the very architecture the Hunts had used to build their silver position. Simultaneously, Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker raised interest rates from 11.75% to an extraordinary 20%. The official rationale was combating broad inflation, but the timing was suspicious. 1 week after the Hunts ceased market activity, Volcker began lowering rates, suggesting the Fed's primary objective may have been breaking the Hunt corner specifically. Volcker also quietly encouraged banks to cease lending for precious metals speculation. Borrowing costs exploded. The Hunts' heavily leveraged positions became economically unsustainable. Critics raised uncomfortable questions. Several members of COMEX and CBOT boards held short silver positions, betting that the prices would fall. When the Hunts drove prices upward, these board members faced personal losses. They had obvious incentive to intervene against Hunt interests. The structural conflict of interest was never adequately addressed. Alternative analysts argued that the government had changed rules mid-game, that the Hunts' positions, while massive, had operated within the existing regulatory framework when they were accumulated. Changing rules retroactively, they argued, fundamentally altered the game for participants. The rush to silver and gold in 1979 and 1980 represented a crisis of confidence in the US dollar and Fed Reserve policy. A successful Hunt corner would have validated exactly the inflation fears the Fed was desperate to contain. Suppressing precious metals demand protected the credibility of fiat currency, but whether the intervention was legitimate regulation or suppression of a legal investment strategy, the effect was the same. The Hunts were allegedly finished. The collapse came on March 27, 1980. Silver prices fell by more than 50% in a single trading day, from $21.62 to $10.80 per ounce. Within weeks, silver had dropped below $11, a 78% decline from the January peak. The Hunts' $10 billion in paper gains evaporated instantly. Their positions transformed from extraordinary assets into approximately $1.7 billion in debt, as brokers demanded payment for margin calls they could not meet. The federal government's response demonstrated how seriously authorities regarded the systemic risk. Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker personally authorized a $1 billion emergency loan to facilitate the Hunts' settlement of obligations to creditors. The loan was administered through a consortium of banks rather than as a direct government bailout. This allowed the government to claim it was not underwriting dangerous financial speculation. But the reality was clear: the Hunts were too big to fail. The same regulators who had changed the rules to destroy their position now intervened to prevent their collapse from destroying the broader financial system. The private bank consortium ultimately negotiated a restructuring agreement that allowed the Hunts to retain some personal assets while being forced to liquidate their silver holdings over years. The contradiction was obvious to everyone watching. The legal reckoning came years later. Minpeco S.A., a mining company owned by the Peruvian government, sued after suffering losses on silver futures, claiming the Hunts had conspired to manipulate the market. The trial concluded in August 1988, 8 years after the collapse. A federal jury found Nelson Bunker Hunt and William Herbert Hunt guilty of violating racketeering laws, commodities statutes, and antitrust regulations. Their brother, Lamar Hunt, was found not guilty of racketeering, but guilty of the other charges. The jury also found International Metals Investment Company and Mahmoud Fustak liable as co-conspirators. The jury awarded $130 to $134 million in damages, triple Minpeco's actual losses of approximately $44 million as required under federal racketeering statutes. Minpeco, however, had originally sought $450 million. In a separate case, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission had charged the Hunts in 1985 with market manipulation. In 1989, the CFTC fined each brother $10 million and permanently banned them from commodity trading in the United States. Shockingly, the Hunts never faced criminal charges. The entire proceeding was civil, focusing on damages rather than prison sentences. In 1988, both Nelson and William declared personal bankruptcy, their debts exceeding $1.5 billion. They were forced to liquidate assets for years, including their ancient Greek and Roman coin collections, to satisfy creditor claims. It took nearly a decade to fully unwind their silver holdings. One estimate suggested family losses exceeding 1/3 of their total wealth, not just from silver, but from the simultaneous collapse in oil and sugar refining prices. So the brothers were ruined, but the Hunt dynasty was not. Silver took 45 years to recover to the nominal price levels of the 1980 peak. Adjusted for inflation, full recovery took even longer. The trauma permanently altered commodity markets. COMEX adopted permanent position limits and margin requirements that made market cornering extraordinarily difficult. The CFTC strengthened surveillance for detecting coordinated trading across multiple entities and brokers. Rules for aggregating positions held by related parties became more stringent. These safeguards remain in effect today. But the Hunt family itself proved more resilient than their silver bet. While Nelson and William faced financial ruin, other branches of the family flourished. Rayleigh Hunt, HL's eldest son from his later marriage to Ruth Ray, had retained control of the Hunt Oil Company. He built Hunt Consolidated Inc. into one of the largest privately held companies in the entire United States. Today, Rayleigh Hunt's net worth is estimated at approximately $9.16 billion. His operations span oil and gas exploration, refining, liquid natural gas development, power generation, and infrastructure projects. Lyda Hill, one of H.L. Hunt's granddaughters, is worth over $5 billion and has publicly pledged to give away her entire fortune, most of it during her lifetime, through initiatives focused on environmental conservation, scientific research, and community development. And then there's Lamar Hunt, the brother's younger sibling who took a different path. When the NFL rebuffed his request for a Dallas franchise in 1959, Lamar didn't accept defeat. He approached other rejected applicants and formed what he called the Foolish Club, 8 businessmen who created the American Football League to compete with the NFL. His Dallas Texans became the Kansas City Chiefs in 1963. His negotiations with NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle proved instrumental in achieving the 1970 AFL-NFL merger. The Chiefs have since won 4 Super Bowls, including 3 between 2019 and 2024, and their 2024 valuation exceeded $4.85 billion. When Lamar Hunt died of cancer in 2006, he left ownership equally divided amongst his 4 children, each inheriting approximately 25% of the franchise. His son Clark Hunt now serves as CEO and chairman. Lamar Hunt also founded Major League Soccer, brought the 1994 FIFA World Cup to America, and left a sports legacy that extends far beyond football. Forbes estimates the total Hunt family net worth at $24.8 billion, making them the 12th wealthiest family in the United States. The family's holdings span Hunt Oil Company, Hunt Petroleum, Hunt Energy Enterprises, Hunt Real Estate Investments, the Kansas City Chiefs, FC Dallas, Columbus Crew, D Magazine, and Rosewood Hotels, and many more. The Mount Vernon estate on White Rock Lake, H.L. Hunt's original power base, was listed at $19.95 million in 2025. The family wealth structure reflects fragmentation rather than unity, multiple independently managed fiefs rather than a single coordinated empire. Ongoing family disputes, including the 2007-2008 litigation between Albert Hill III and family trustees over the valuation and control of Hunt Petroleum Holdings, demonstrate that even extraordinary wealth cannot guarantee family harmony. But the Silver Corner remains their most famous or infamous chapter, other than arguably the NFL. 2 brothers who controlled nearly half of the world's silver, who partnered with Saudi royalty, who drove prices up 700% in 4 months. They discovered that even with $10 billion in theoretical resources and the intelligence to orchestrate a globally coordinated commodity corner, they remained subordinate to regulatory authority. When the government decided the Hunt brothers had gone too far, the rules changed overnight. The Hunts, despite their magnitude, lost. But here's the final lesson of the Hunt Silver Corner. By authorizing emergency lending to facilitate the Hunts' debt service, the Federal Reserve signaled that even the most reckless speculation would receive government support if it threatened systemic collapse. This lesson would prove relevant in subsequent financial crises. Too big to fail didn't begin in 2008. It began with two Texas oil heirs who tried to buy all the silver on Earth, and the dynasty endured anyway. With that said, we'd love to see you in the comments. When two brothers tried to corner the silver market and the government changed the rules to stop them, who was really protecting whom? The financial system or the status quo? We look forward to hearing from you below, and we appreciate your time as always here on Old Money Empires. Cheers.